They called the cops over a parked car, thinking it'd be an easy ticket, but when the lights flashed and the badge came out, every officer on scene stood at attention. The night was quiet, eerily so, the kind of calm that made every small sound feel louder than it should. The crickets had gone silent, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then came the sudden burst of flashing red and blue lights, slicing through the stillness like a warning flare. From his porch, Ethan Ward squinted into the glow. The lights reflected off the windows of the cul-de-sac, bouncing across manicured lawns and parked cars. 2 patrol vehicles rolled to a stop in front of his brother's pickup truck, a heavy-duty gray vehicle with the state seal faintly visible on its side. Alex Ward stood beside it, arms folded, his face unreadable beneath the porch light. Across the street, Kellen Drake stood like a general awaiting a surrender. His pressed khaki shorts, tucked polo shirt, and clipboard gave him the posture of a man who lived for authority, no matter how small. The HOA president's grin was sharp and self-satisfied, his eyes gleaming behind thin-framed glasses. "That's an illegal vehicle in a residential zone," Kellen announced loudly, ensuring every porch light flickered on and every neighbor peeked through their blinds. "We have ordinances against commercial or enforcement vehicles parked overnight. You're in violation, Mr. Ward." Alex didn't move. He simply watched the man, a faint shadow of amusement flickering in his eyes. "Is that so?" he said softly, his voice steady, almost calm enough to disarm the tension in the air. Kellen puffed out his chest. "The rules apply to everyone. HOA regulations are non-negotiable. I don't care who you are." The officers stepped out of their cars. One of them, a tall man with a serious look, approached the truck. His flashlight beam swept across the vehicle's license plate, then over to Alex's jacket. The moment the beam hit the golden emblem stitched above the pocket, the officer froze. He blinked, looked closer, then straightened immediately. "Sir," he said, his tone shifting in an instant. "You're with the state?" Alex nodded once. "State Trooper, Highway Division," he confirmed, pulling out his badge wallet. The silver gleam caught in the patrol lights, unmistakable and undeniable. The second officer stepped closer, recognized the insignia, and without hesitation, lifted his hand in a respectful salute. The air changed. The same neighbors who had been recording the scene from behind their curtains lowered their phones. The tension dissolved into confusion. Kellen's smirk faltered as the officers greeted Alex not as a suspect, but as a superior. Ethan could see Kellen's face drain of color even from across the street. His clipboard dipped slightly. "Wait," Kellen stammered, his voice suddenly less certain. "There must be some mistake. This truck, this vehicle, still violates—" "It's state property," Alex interrupted, his tone firm but calm, "and exempt from HOA jurisdiction under operational law." He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. The words carried weight. The officers nodded in agreement. "Everything checks out, sir," the taller officer said. He turned to Kellen. "You can't cite a state enforcement vehicle for residential parking violations. That's outside your authority. But this is private property." Kellen tried again, gripping his clipboard like it could still save him. "This community has rules." The second officer cut him off politely but decisively. "Sir, you called us for a parking violation. What you failed to mention is that the vehicle in question belongs to a state trooper conducting official duties. That's not just overreach. It's a misuse of emergency resources." Whispers began to ripple through the small crowd that had formed, neighbors in slippers and robes murmuring behind hedges. Kellen's jaw tightened, his hand trembling slightly as he tried to reassert control. "You can't talk to me like that." "I'm the HOA president," he said, his voice cracking just enough for everyone to notice. Ethan stepped down from the porch, unable to resist the gravity of the moment. He moved quietly beside his brother, who still hadn't raised his voice or changed his calm stance. "Everything good here?" Ethan asked, his tone casual but edged with quiet amusement. Alex's eyes stayed on Kellen. "Everything's fine," he said. "Just a misunderstanding." The taller officer looked between them and nodded. "We'll file this as a non-incident," he said. Then, with one last glance at Kellen, he added, "Next time, sir, verify before making false reports." The two officers gave Alex another brief salute before stepping back into their patrol cars. As they pulled away, the lights faded, leaving the cul-de-sac bathed once more in the soft glow of porch lamps. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, filled with unspoken judgment. Kellen stood frozen in place. The neighbors who had once followed his every rule now looked at him with something between embarrassment and disbelief. He glanced around, searching for support, but found none. Even his loyal vice president, Mr. Jenner, was retreating into his house, pretending not to see him. You think this changes anything? Kellen said finally, pointing his pen at Alex. You're still subject to community standards. I'll have this reviewed. You'll see Alex didn't respond. He simply looked at him, steady, expressionless, like a man who had already measured his opponent and found him lacking. Then he turned back toward the house. Come on, Ethan, he said quietly. Let's go inside. As the door shut behind them, the neighborhood fell still again. Ethan leaned against the wall, exhaling. He's not going to drop it, he said. You saw his face. I did, Alex replied, pulling off his jacket and setting his badge on the counter. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp, alert. Men like him never drop things. They dig until they fall in their own hole through the window. Kellen still stood in the street, watching their house like a man humiliated in front of his court. The clipboard was now hanging loosely by his side, his posture tense, shoulders stiff. But there was something else in his stare, a quiet promise that this wasn't over. Ethan followed his brother's gaze and felt a cold prickle down his neck. What do you think he'll try next? Alex didn't answer right away. He reached for the remote, turned off the porch light, and said evenly, whatever it is, he's going to regret it. The night swallowed the words, but they lingered in the air like a prophecy. The cul-de-sac went dark again, and the only sound left was the hum of the crickets returning to life, unaware that a quiet war had just begun. He thought this was a victory. He didn't realize he had just picked a fight with the wrong family. Morning sunlight washed over Brookfield Estates, a quiet suburban community designed for peace, but ruled by fear. The lawns were manicured to perfection, the houses painted in identical shades of beige and cream, and every driveway looked like it had been measured with a ruler. From afar it seemed like the perfect neighborhood, but anyone who lived there knew the truth. Brookfield wasn't a neighborhood. It was a kingdom, and Kellen Drake was its self-proclaimed king. Kellen's rule began the moment he became HOA president 3 years earlier. He was a tall man in his mid-40s, always dressed as though heading to an inspection, pressed khakis, a tucked-in polo embroidered with Brookfield Estates HOA, and a clipboard clutched like a scepter. Every morning at 8 sharp, he would make his rounds, marching up and down the sidewalks, peering into yards, and jotting notes with the precision of a military officer. He claimed it was about maintaining community standards. In truth, it was about control. Neighbors learned to dread the sound of his shoes crunching against gravel. By the time Kellen reached your property, it was too late. A notice would appear within 24 hours. Unauthorized mailbox modification, $50 fine. Trash bins visible from the street, $75 fine. He fined a retired man for having a slightly faded welcome mat. He fined a widower for hanging wind chimes louder than permitted decibel limits. And when anyone dared question him, he'd flash the HOA bylaws like they were federal law. Ethan Ward had seen men like Kellen before, small men who needed power to feel tall. But even he underestimated just how far Kellen would go to enforce his rule. Things escalated after his brother Alex moved in. Alex, a state trooper recently divorced, had parked his marked patrol truck in the driveway. Within hours, Kellen appeared, clipboard ready. "That's a commercial vehicle," he declared, tapping the hood with his pen. "Not permitted in a residential zone. You'll need to remove it immediately or face daily fines." Alex didn't argue. He simply gave a small nod and replied, "I'll look into it." That calmness seemed to irritate Kellen more than defiance would have. The next day, another notice appeared. "Unapproved vehicle parking, $100 fine." Then another, and another. It became a ritual. Every morning, a new envelope tucked neatly under the windshield wiper, signed with Kellen's looping signature. But what Kellen didn't know was that every single notice was being photographed, time-stamped, and stored. Alex had begun building a quiet record of harassment. "You're really keeping all of that?" Ethan asked one night. watching his brother organize a folder of scanned documents. Alex looked up from the kitchen table. "Men like him depend on fear," he said. "They think silence is surrender. But silence can be strategy." Meanwhile, Kellen's behavior grew bolder. He started holding inspection meetings right outside their house, bringing along other HOA board members to nod approvingly as he pointed out violations. He even tried to question Alex about the patrol truck in front of neighbors, his voice loud and smug. "We can't have law enforcement vehicles intimidating residents," he said one afternoon. "This is a peaceful community." "That's funny," Ethan muttered from the porch. "I thought it was peaceful until you showed up." Kellen turned sharply, his lips tightening. "Careful, Mr. Ward," he said. "Verbal hostility can be reported as a community disturbance." Alex stepped forward before his brother could respond. His tone remained even. "Kellen, you're overstepping. This vehicle is state-owned and legally exempt from your HOA restrictions." Kellen's grin widened, smug as ever. "Then I suppose we'll let the board decide." He turned away, satisfied with his own arrogance, and walked off while scribbling something on his clipboard. Over the next week, the harassment intensified. Notices now came with inflated fines. A warning letter accused them of failing to maintain their lawn, though Alex had mowed it just the day before. Another claimed their front porch light was too bright for nighttime aesthetics. When Ethan tried to confront him, Kellen waved the papers in his face. "You want to live here, you follow my rules," he snapped. "This community thrives because I keep order." "Order," Ethan repeated, barely containing his anger. "You mean control," Kellen smirked. "Call it what you like." "The board backs me. Always has." That statement lingered with Ethan. The board. Who exactly was the board? Over the following days, he began noticing odd things. Neighbors avoiding eye contact, whispers at the mailboxes, men hurriedly changing the subject when Kellen's name came up. There was something deeper going on. Some of the older residents mentioned that Kellen handled all HOA finances personally, claiming the accountant had retired. Others hinted that complaints filed against him mysteriously vanished from the records. One evening, while Ethan took the trash out, he caught sight of Kellen talking quietly to a landscaper near the entrance sign. The man was holding a thick envelope. When he noticed Ethan watching, he quickly pocketed it and drove off. Kellen turned, his smile too forced. "Evening, Ward," he said coolly before disappearing down the path. That was the moment Ethan realized Kellen's power wasn't just about rules, it was about leverage. He had something on the board members, something that kept them silent. The fines, the fear, the intimidation, it all fed his control. But control had its limits. The night after the police incident with Alex's patrol truck, a neighborhood meeting was held in the clubhouse. Kellen strutted to the front, chest out, acting as if nothing had happened. "We must address recent violations of vehicle policy," he began, glaring in the ward's direction. "Certain individuals think they're above community standards." He was cut off when one of the officers from that night, a tall man in uniform, walked into the back of the room. Conversation stopped instantly. The officer approached Alex, nodded respectfully, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Just wanted to thank you for your cooperation last night, Trooper Ward. We've already reported the false complaint to County Dispatch." The room fell into stunned silence. Kellen froze, color draining from his face. For once, the clipboard didn't make him look powerful. It made him look small. Alex stood, calm as always. "No problem, officer," he said. "Always glad to work with the community." As the officer left, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Kellen forced a laugh, his voice trembling. "Well, that, wasn't necessary." Misunderstandings happened, but the damage was done. His authority, once unshakable, had cracked. Ethan caught his brother's eye, and for the first time they both knew the tide was turning. What Kellen didn't realize was that this was only the beginning of his undoing. His power was built on intimidation, and intimidation fails the moment it's challenged. Beneath his arrogance, cracks were forming. He didn't just want power, he wanted submission. And he was about to learn that some men don't bend that easily. The morning began with the kind of calm that makes you think the world has finally decided to leave you alone. The sunlight dripped through the oak branches, dusting the driveway with gold. Birds chattered lazily in the distance, and for a fleeting moment, everything felt normal again. But normal never lasted long on Mariner's Court, not with Kellen Drake living 2 doors down. Alex Ward rolled out of bed early, his boots already by the door, his coffee cooling beside the toolbox. The truck, his pride, his old state-issued workhorse, had been idling fine the night before. But when he turned the key that morning, the only sound that came was a hollow click, followed by silence. He tried again. Nothing. A frown crossed his face as he climbed out and popped the hood. The air was thick with dew, and a thin mist curled up from the grass as he leaned over the engine bay. What he saw made his stomach drop. The battery cables, thick black and red, had been sliced clean through, not frayed or chewed, but cut. Precise, deliberate. From the porch, I stood watching. The coffee in my hand suddenly felt too heavy. "What happened?" I asked. Alex didn't answer right away. He just stared at the wires, the muscles in his jaw shifting as if he were chewing on anger. Then, in a low voice, he said, "He touched state property." There was no need to say the name. We both knew who he meant. Kellen Drake, HOA president, self-proclaimed community reformer, and the man who had made it his personal mission to turn our neighborhood into his private kingdom. The sabotage was bold even for him. Cutting battery cables crossed a line no fine or letter ever could. It wasn't about rules anymore, it was personal. Later that afternoon, a letter arrived in the mailbox, printed on crisp white paper, the HOA logo stamped in gold. Alex unfolded it at the kitchen table, his grease-stained hands trembling slightly. I leaned over his shoulder to read. Notice of non-compliance. Failure to maintain vehicle functionality and property aesthetics. Continued neglect will result in enforcement escalation and potential county involvement. At the bottom was the signature, sharp, deliberate, and smug. Kellen Drake, HOA president. Alex exhaled through his nose. "He thinks he's clever," he muttered. "He's not." The letter wasn't just a warning. It was bait. Kellen wanted a reaction, something he could twist into justification for punishment. But Alex didn't take the bait. He folded the paper neatly, slid it into a binder already half full of printed emails and meeting notes, and labeled the section Vehicle Sabotage, March 17th. I watched him, half impressed, half worried. "You're not going to report it?" "Oh, I'll report it," he said, closing the binder with quiet finality. "Just not yet." That night, Alex worked in silence. He moved like a man who'd already made up his mind about something important. I helped where I could, checking the perimeter lights, tightening screws on the security mounts. By midnight, the new motion-activated cameras were up and running, hidden beneath the gutters and tucked into the hedges. When I asked why he was going through so much trouble, Alex just said, "If he wants a war, we'll let him start it on camera." The next morning, he reviewed the footage. What we saw made the room go still. There was Kellen, bald spot gleaming under the security light, creeping across the lawn just after midnight, bolt cutters in hand. He looked around nervously, cutting the cables with 2 sharp snaps before disappearing into the shadows. Alex leaned back in his chair, a cold smile touching his lips. "There it is," he said. "Proof." But instead of storming to Kellen's house or calling the police, Alex started planning. His quiet patience scared me more than any outburst could have. Every email from Kellen, every false citation or inflated fine, went into a new folder labeled HOA abuse evidence. He even backed it all up on a flash drive and tucked it inside the lining of an old jacket hanging by the door. Over the next few days, tension in the neighborhood began to thicken like smoke. You could feel it in the air, the forced smiles at mailboxes, the way curtains twitched when Alex walked by. Then came the next twist. A week later, 2 uniformed HOA enforcers, essentially neighborhood volunteers in reflective vests, showed up at our door with a clipboard. One of them, a nervous-looking man named Cooper, cleared his throat. "Mr. Ward," he said, "we've had reports of a non-operational vehicle parked beyond the authorized duration. We'll need to photograph it for record." Alex stood there, calm as ever, though I could see the pulse flickering in his neck. "You can take your pictures," he said, stepping aside, "but make sure your camera catches the serial number on the state plates." They did, And the moment they did, their confidence faltered. The truck wasn't a personal vehicle. It was state-issued for Alex's work with environmental compliance. Touching it, damaging it, or even issuing fines against it could be considered tampering with government property. Still, Kellen didn't stop. The very next day, a fresh notice appeared on our door, this time claiming the fence height violated neighborhood standards. It was absurd. Alex had built that fence exactly to code. That night, Alex said quietly, "He's desperate." And desperate men make mistakes. He wasn't wrong. One evening, while Alex was at work, I noticed movement on the driveway camera feed. Someone was back again. Same gate, same flashlight beam sweeping across the yard. But this time, the person wasn't alone. Another figure lingered by the curb, holding what looked like a walkie-talkie. I called Alex immediately. He was home in less than 10 minutes. The two figures scattered when they saw headlights coming. Alex jumped out of the truck and shouted after them, "You're on camera!" Every second of it, his voice carried across the street, raw and furious. Neighbors peeked from windows, whispers rippling like wind through the block. The next morning, the HOA newsletter arrived. Thinly veiled propaganda. It warned residents about unneighborly conduct and aggressive behavior exhibited toward HOA personnel. Alex laughed under his breath. "He's framing me in advance," he said, running a hand over his face. Smart move for a cornered rat. Days passed, each quieter than the last, but beneath the surface, everything was winding tighter. I started to notice cars slowing down by our house, phones held up as if recording. Someone left a dead plant on our porch with a note that read, "Neglect brings decay." Kellen's power was built on fear of fines, of isolation, of losing the place people called home. But Alex wasn't afraid. He began preparing something else, something Kellen didn't expect. At night, I'd find him at the desk, typing, printing, and filing. When I asked what he was working on, he said only, "A full report. Photos, footage, timestamps. I'm sending it higher up." Then came the shock. One afternoon, as Alex reviewed footage, he froze the frame at a peculiar detail. Kellen wasn't acting alone. In the reflection of a neighbor's car window, another figure stood beside him, a woman wearing a city-issued maintenance badge. Zooming in, Alex caught the name tag, M. Hollis, an assistant from the county property office. That changed everything. It wasn't just HOA overreach anymore. It was collusion with local officials. The revelation hit like thunder. Alex looked at me, his expression grim. He's been feeding her falsified reports. That's how he got those threats through the county so fast. He printed the still frame and added it to the binder. Then he said something that sent a chill through me. If they're willing to use county leverage, it means they're covering something bigger. Money, contracts, maybe fraud. The next evening, while he was out filing a formal complaint, someone tried to break into our garage. The motion camera caught the door rattling violently before the intruder bolted. When Alex returned, he didn't even speak. He just opened his laptop, uploaded the footage, and labeled it Retaliation Attempt Number 1. By then, it was clear. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. It was a battle of evidence versus intimidation. And Alex was winning. Kellen must have felt it too. His tone shifted in emails from smug to defensive, then finally to veiled threats. "This neighborhood has rules, Mr. Ward. Those who resist structure often find themselves isolated. But Alex wasn't resisting structure. He was defending justice." The night before the big HOA meeting, I caught him standing at the window, binder in hand, staring at Kellen's house across the street. His reflection in the glass looked tired, but determined. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "he'll realize he picked the wrong man to push." The air outside was still, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. I didn't know what Alex planned to do, but something in his eyes told me the time for patience had ended. And as he turned away from the window, placing the binder on the table, I knew one thing for certain. Alex wasn't just going to clear his name, he was going to expose Kellen for what he truly was, a fraud hiding behind a rule book. The weeks that followed were quiet on the surface, but underneath that silence, something powerful was building. Every morning, Alex would disappear into his study before dawn, the soft glow of his laptop screen flickering through the window blinds. Piles of papers grew on the table, printouts of emails, screenshots, and pages of notes marked with yellow highlights. He wasn't just preparing a case. He was constructing a weapon. By now, the neighborhood was split. Some residents still feared Kellen Drake's authority, whispering about his fines and warnings like they were law. Others, tired of the intimidation, began to gravitate toward Alex. It started small, a wave, a quiet, "Thank you." A note slipped under the door. Then, one evening, there was a knock. An older man, Mr. Tenney, stood on the porch, hat in hand and worry etched into every line on his face. "Mr. Ward," he said softly, glancing over his shoulder before stepping inside, "I think you ought to see something." He carried a worn binder, one that looked almost like Alex's. Inside were old HOA statements, invoices, and payment receipts, but something was wrong. The numbers didn't add up. "This here says we paid into a maintenance fund," Tenney explained, tapping the page with a trembling finger, "but there's never been any maintenance. And look, Kellen's name is the only signature on the disbursement forms. No treasurer, no witnesses." Alex's eyes narrowed. "You're saying he's been pocketing HOA fees?" "Every dime of them," Tenney said. "He's been keeping it off the books. Said it was for landscaping improvements. But we haven't seen a new flower bed in years." That was the first spark. Over the next several days, more neighbors began to come forward. Mrs. Paloma from across the street brought printed emails showing that Kellen had doubled her late fee after she questioned his accounting. Another man, a single father named Carson, confessed that Kellen had threatened to foreclose on his home over a supposed missed payment, one that bank records proved had gone through. Each story painted the same picture, a man who had used the HOA as a shield for personal gain. Alex gathered it all, statements, receipts, and testimonies, and began organizing them into digital folders labeled by category: financial misconduct, threats and coercion, false citations, property damage. What struck me most was how meticulous he was. He didn't gloat or rush. Every file he saved had a timestamp. Every document was cross-referenced. He wasn't just trying to win an argument, he was building an airtight case. Then one night Alex leaned back from his computer and said, "It's ready." I looked at the stack of evidence beside him. Hundreds of pages of printed proof. "Ready for what?" "For him," Alex said simply, "and for everyone who's been afraid to stand up." The next morning, he left early and drove to the County Housing Commission. He didn't tell Kellen, of course. He didn't have to. What he filed there, a detailed report outlining misuse of HOA funds, property damage, and falsified records, was enough to trigger an internal review. But Alex didn't stop there. He also dropped off a copy at the sheriff's department, knowing that if there was one thing Kellen couldn't manipulate, it was the law. Still, Kellen remained oblivious. To him, it was business as usual. When the notice went out for the next HOA meeting, it was clear he had no idea what was coming. He strutted around the neighborhood that week, clipboard in hand, issuing fresh violation slips and smugly reminding residents about mandatory attendance. The meeting was held at the community clubhouse, a place that once hosted barbecues and family gatherings, now reduced to a stage for Kellen's arrogance. By the time I arrived with Alex, the air inside was thick with tension. Residents sat in folding chairs, some whispering nervously, others staring at the floor. Kellen stood at the front beside a projector, flipping through papers, every movement sharp and self-satisfied. Alex chose a seat in the front row. He looked calm, composed, almost serene. But I could tell from the set of his jaw and the steady way he arranged his binder that he was ready for battle. "Let's get started," Kellen announced, his voice booming through the microphone. "First order of business, property maintenance compliance. Mr. Ward, your vehicle continues to be an eyesore to community standards." There was a faint ripple of unease across the room. Everyone knew what had happened between them. Alex looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. "Actually," he said, rising to his feet, "before you continue, why don't we talk about your standards, Kellen?" A murmur spread through the room. Kellen frowned. "Excuse me?" Alex gestured toward the projector on the table. "This isn't your equipment, is it?" Kellen blinked, thrown off. "No, but that's irrelevant." Before he could finish, Alex pressed a button on the remote. The lights dimmed, and the screen flickered to life. The first image froze Kellen where he stood, A clear, high-resolution video of him walking across Alex's driveway, bolt cutters in hand, caught red-handed cutting the battery cables of a state-issued truck. Gasps filled the room. A few neighbors turned to each other in shock. Kellen stammered, That's doctored footage." Alex spoke over him, voice calm but unyielding. "This footage comes from a motion-activated camera installed after a series of property violations. Time-stamped, authenticated, and verified by the county tech office yesterday morning." The next slide appeared. Scanned copies of financial statements. Each line item was highlighted in red. "Now," Alex continued, "let's talk about this so-called maintenance fund. Payments collected over 2 years. No corresponding expenses, but withdrawals." He clicked again. "Made directly to an account registered under Drakey Community Management, LLC." Kellen's face went pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but Alex wasn't done. One by one, images appeared on the screen, letters of intimidation, doctored citations, and bank receipts that linked HOA payments to Kellen's personal business account. Then came the statements from neighbors, signed, dated, and witnessed. A voice from the back, Mrs. Paloma, spoke up, trembling. "You told me my late fee was going to foreclosure court." That was a lie, wasn't it? Kellen's lips moved, but no words came. The room had turned against him. Alex continued, "These people trusted you to manage their homes, their safety, their peace. Instead, you turned this neighborhood into your personal bank account." Then came the final blow. Alex clicked one last time, and the screen displayed a photo, a still frame of Kellen meeting behind closed doors with Monsieur Hollis, the county property clerk, exchanging envelopes. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, and whispers filled the air. Kellen's composure finally cracked. That's a setup. You don't know what you're talking about," he shouted, his voice rising. Alex stepped closer, eyes steady. "You're right. I don't know everything. But the sheriff's office does. They've been reviewing this footage for the past week." The silence that followed was deafening. Every head turned toward the back of the room where 2 uniformed deputies stood just inside the doorway, arms folded. Kellen froze. His clipboard slipped from his hand, papers scattering across the floor. One of the deputies stepped forward. "Mr. Drake," he said, "we'd like to ask you a few questions regarding financial misconduct and property damage." Kellen's face drained of color. He looked around the room, desperate for someone to defend him. No one did. The neighbors who had once feared him now stared in quiet satisfaction. As the deputies guided him toward the door, Kellen turned, trying to salvage a shred of control. "You think this will save you, Ward? You don't understand what you've started." Alex didn't flinch. He just closed his binder and said evenly, "I understand perfectly." When the doors shut behind them, the room stayed silent for a long moment before breaking into scattered applause. Some people cried. Others simply sat there, stunned, as if they were seeing the light for the first time in years. Alex gathered his things without saying much. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. Outside, the evening air felt different, lighter somehow. I watched as he stood under the fading sunlight, binder in hand. His shoulders finally relaxed. For weeks, he had carried the weight of every injustice, every threat, every sleepless night. Now it was over, or so it seemed. Because even as the sheriff's car pulled away, Alex's eyes followed it with quiet caution. He knew men like Kellen didn't go down without a fight, but for now he had done what no one else had dared. He had turned truth into a weapon. And as the door of the clubhouse closed behind us, the final words he'd spoken inside still echoed in my mind. "Actually," Alex said, pressing a button, "let's talk about your standards, Kellen." And that's when the footage began to play. The air inside the Brookfield clubhouse felt electric, charged with the kind of silence that only comes before something shatters. The projector hummed faintly, the blue glow painting the shocked faces of the neighbors who had gathered. No one moved. No one breathed. The first clip played again. Kellen Drake creeping across a driveway in the dead of night, bolt cutters gleaming under the porch light. A man who had once prided himself on community leadership now looked like a criminal caught mid-act. Gasps rippled through the room. Some neighbors clapped their hands over their mouths. Others whispered Kellen's name like they didn't quite believe it. The man himself stood frozen, eyes darting between the screen and the crowd. This is out of context," he stammered, sweat forming along his hairline. "You can't prove this was me." Alex didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Timestamp, February 8th, 1:23 a.m., he said, his tone steady, professional. "Camera 3, mounted on my front porch, recorded you cutting the battery cables of a state-owned patrol truck. The following morning, you filed an HOA violation accusing me of abandoning an unregistered vehicle." He pressed another button on the remote. The next clip rolled, Kellen slipping folded letters into mailboxes, all stamped with the HOA seal but unsigned. Then came still frames of bank records, highlighted sections, and scanned copies of withdrawal slips. Each image was a nail in the coffin. "These aren't just violations," Alex said, letting the words sink in. "They're crimes." The room erupted into murmurs. A few people began pulling out their phones, snapping photos of the screen. Kellen's voice rose, cracking under pressure. "This is a setup. You've gone too far, Ward. You think you can embarrass me in front of my neighbors? I am the HOA." Alex turned toward him slowly. "No," he said, his tone calm but edged with finality. "You were the HOA. Now you're just another man who thought power made him untouchable." Before Kellen could respond, the double doors at the back of the room opened. The sound of polished boots echoed against the tile floor. Two uniformed officers stepped inside, one older, the other young, but both instantly recognizable. They were the same officers who had once responded to Kellen's illegal parking complaint, the same ones who had saluted when they saw Alex's badge. Every head turned. Kellen's complexion went ghostly white. His clipboard slipped from his hand, clattering against the floor. "Mr. Kellen Drake?" the older officer asked, his voice cutting clean through the tense air. "You're under arrest for property damage, fraud, and harassment under the Brookfield Homeowners Association statute and state penal code." The room exploded in noise, gasps, whispers, and even a few cheers. For years, these neighbors had endured Kellen's endless fines and threats. Now they watched justice arrive in real time. Kellen stumbled backward, pointing at Alex like a man drowning. "You can't do this! You can't arrest me in front of them! He's behind this! He's setting me up!" The younger officer stepped forward, voice firm. "Sir, we've received a full report from the County Housing Commission along with verified evidence, including your financial statements and security footage. You have the right to remain silent." The handcuffs clicked, echoing louder than any word that had been spoken that night. For a moment, no one said anything. The neighbors who had once cowered under Kellen's glare now watched him being led toward the door in stunned silence. Then, as he passed, someone began to clap. Another joined. Within seconds, the entire room filled with applause. Not loud or mocking, but full of release, like a breath held for too long finally let go. Kellen turned one last time, eyes burning with humiliation and rage. "You'll regret this, Ward. You don't know what you've started." Alex simply met his gaze. "What I started was accountability." The officers guided Kellen through the doors and into the night, the echo of their boots fading into the distance. When the doors shut, the crowd broke apart into hushed conversations. People clustered around Alex, shaking his hand, thanking him for standing up when no one else would. Mr. Tenney approached, his old binder clutched to his chest. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said quietly. He had us all scared. Alex gave a small smile. Fear only works when no one's watching. Now everyone's seen what he's really been doing. By the next morning, word had spread beyond Brookfield Estates. The story hit the local paper. HOA president arrested in fraud scandal. The photo showed Kellen being escorted into a squad car, face hidden behind his arm. The article detailed how he had embezzled thousands of dollars in HOA funds, fabricated citations, and falsified meeting minutes to hide his misconduct. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt alive again. People waved to each other. Kids played outside without hearing the sound of Kellen's voice demanding they stay off the sidewalks. The community sign, once emblazoned with Brookfield Estates, Order and Pride, now had a new addition, temporary at first, but symbolic. Someone had taped a handwritten note beneath it, "Order without tyranny." In the weeks that followed, a special meeting was held to dissolve the existing HOA board. Kellen's allies, once so loud, were nowhere to be found. In their place, a new community council was formed, led by residents who actually lived in the neighborhood, not people looking to profit from it. The transformation was subtle but powerful. The constant stream of violation letters stopped. The late fees were reviewed and refunded. The maintenance fund was repurposed into something real: new lights for the park, repairs for the playground, and a community garden that families built together on weekends. I remember watching Alex from the porch one evening, coffee in hand, as he stood by his truck, no longer worried about where it was parked. The same truck that had started this entire feud now sat proudly in the driveway, sunlight glinting off the polished badge on the side. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" I said, stepping beside him. He nodded. "Quiet," he replied. Then, with a faint smile, "The way it should have been all along." But there was something in his tone, something thoughtful. "You know," he continued, "Kellen wasn't wrong about one thing. This place needed order. He just confused control with responsibility." I laughed softly. "And you showed him the difference." Alex glanced toward the distant end of the street, where months ago, patrol lights had first flashed red and blue across our lawns. The memory of that night, the moment Kellen thought he had power over the wrong man, still lingered in the air like an echo of justice served. Days turned into weeks, and life settled back into rhythm. Yet every so often I'd catch glimpses of the change Kellen's downfall had inspired. Kids chalking drawings on the sidewalks he once banned them from using, men fixing their fences together instead of filing complaints, families hosting block parties under string lights instead of sitting behind drawn curtains. The fear that had once suffocated Brookfield had vanished, replaced by laughter, conversation, and the faint hum of lawnmowers that didn't need HOA approval. Alex never took credit. He never gave a speech or bragged about what he'd done. When reporters asked for interviews, he declined. "It wasn't about revenge," he told one persistent journalist. "It was about right and wrong. That's all, but I knew better." He hadn't just restored order. He had reminded everyone that authority only holds power when people allow it to. The HOA board was officially disbanded within a month. The bylaws were rewritten to ensure no one could hold unchecked control again. And Kellen? Last I heard, he had taken a plea deal. Fraud, falsification, and property damage, all on record. His dream of being a community leader had ended in court filings and restitution payments. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the neighborhood lights flickered on, I walked past Alex's house. He was sitting on the porch, the same calm look on his face that he'd had the night everything began. The badge on his coffee table caught the last glow of daylight, glinting faintly like a quiet promise. "Think he ever saw this coming?" I asked. Alex looked up, his expression unreadable. "People like him never do," he said. Then, after a moment, he added, "The badge doesn't make the man." The man makes the badge mean something. A few houses away, someone honked and waved. The world felt settled again, peaceful. As I turned to leave, the faint flash of distant patrol lights lit up the horizon for just a moment, red and blue reflections dancing across the windows. It reminded me of that first night, the night this all began, and how quickly arrogance can crumble when faced with integrity. The tyrant thought he could control everyone, but the moment he tried to control the wrong man, justice came home wearing a badge. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of abuse of community authority, the misuse of law enforcement resources, and the severe consequences of vigilantism. This narrative aims to highlight the importance of dignity and accountability, showing that petty harassment can lead to immediate and unexpected professional embarrassment.